Hey guys, and welcome to today's podcast. So today I'll be discussing a few different topics, starting off with cryptocurrency and blockchain investments, looking at my investments, my thoughts, my plans. I'll be discussing then UBI and automation, looking at looking at the obvious sort of sides of it that are already discussed, such as has been highlighted by the likes of Andrew Yang. Of course, he discussed universal basic income and automation, but I'm also going to look at more of the social implications, political implications, and the sort of scenarios that could unfold, and of course, the unexpected twists that might come along the way. And then I'll also touch on Future History X, space politics, hypothetical scenarios, and a little bit on my creative plans for the future. So, in terms of my investments, I did a video recently where I looked at what I have invested in, mostly Ethereum and Bitcoin. So kind of sticking to the two top guns in that regard. But I've also invested about 15% of my portfolio is invested in 15% of my portfolio consists of Chainlink and Cardano. I also have quite a bit of Engine Coin at the moment, although my plan is to sell that relatively soon in the hopes that it will go up in the coming days and a week or so. So I'm relatively new to cryptocurrency investing, but I had looked back at it. I had looked at it back in around 2016, 2017. In fact, I was aware of Ethereum in 2017, and I included it in Personal, my web series, as the cryptocurrency of choice for money being sent from one individual to another in one of the scenes at the end of episode 2. Of course, it said in 2027, and it does seem like there's a good chance that Ethereum will be one of the main forms of crypto exchange by the late 2020s, and of course it is already now in the early 2020s. But I didn't invest at the time, so back in 2017, when I became aware of it around summer 2017, I think it was, and I was researching up and coming, came across Ethereum, and I thought, oh, okay. Well, I can't remember exactly when I did the research. Could be in between June and August of that year. June and July, I think, actually. But around June, July, it peaked at around 333. So, based on a conservative estimate, then, with it, well, 333 euro, that is, not dollars, just to clarify. It's now 1978 euros. So now it's about 6 times the value. So had I invested at the time, I have 6 times the value now. So that would have been a good investment at the time. Unfortunately, I didn't do it. Although the crash, of course, was soon to happen. So maybe I wouldn't have held on to it for all the years that would have been needed to, which is what I'm learning about. So I've learned quite a bit about the bull and bear markets recently. In fact, I have a recommendation. You should follow this YouTube channel called Benjamin Cohen. So I've put his link in the description box below. Basically, the reason why I'd recommend his channel is because his thoughts and information and predictions are very down to earth, very realistic, very much based on the data. He doesn't have the sort of glitz and glam of some of the YouTubers out there who are, you probably see them pop up, and I mean, to me, it's sort of, they might be legitimate, but it kind of has almost a scam sort of vibe to it. You see like, a surprise face, and then you have like a picture of like some dramatic imagery kind of mixed together, and some dramatic all caps titles and so on. And it just, to me, that's always gives off a bad vibe. But a lot of people go to those sorts of videos. But this guy here, I'm talking about Benjamin Cohen, his videos are very down to earth. They're very, they might say they're more boring, but that to me is a good sign because, first of all, less people are going to be there. And secondly, in terms of getting that good advice, but also, he's just honest and down to earth. So he'll just say, if there's a certain price prediction about, say, Cardano, which is on the rise at the moment, as our cryptos across the board, obviously, with the bull run at the moment. He would basically sort of summarize it as, look, it's not going to reach 100x or 1000x in the next few months, for example. He gives honest predictions, but one of the things he says quite often is time is on our side, and I think there is a lot of evidence for that. Of course, you should take all that with a grain of salt, whether you're watching videos from a complete amateur like me or someone with more knowledge like Benjamin Cohen. Regardless, you should take all knowledge with a grain of salt and information, because we're not talking about experts either way. In terms of, it's not expert financial advice, whether it's from me or whether it's even from the YouTuber in general. And of course, they usually do those sorts of disclosures. And of course, the obvious thing is you should never invest more than you can afford to lose, because as unlikely as it is, you never know what could happen if crypto could just vanish off the face of the earth. Of course, probability is pretty slim, but certainly there will be a crash at some point. That's one thing that I've kind of come to realize, is that, so what we're in right now, we're kind of in the middle of a bull run. So the bull run started in a few months back. So if you're actually, I'm looking at Coinbase at the moment, and so Bitcoin, for example, was worth about 9 grand in euros, again doing euros here, in late September, and then it shot up to over 50 grand now. So it's gone 5 times the value in, what's that, September till now is so it's what, September, so it's 7 months. So in 7 months it's gone up 5 times value, which is an exciting increase. But the probability that's going to increase x5 again in the next 7 months by November, I think is fairly unlikely. I don't think there's a realistic chance of that happening. Interesting, this Dogecoin, that's been going up a lot recently. 100% increase in the last 24 hours. Wow. But anyway, so I'm anticipating a crash at some point, either in the second half of this year or perhaps in 2022. 2023, it's possible it could go that long, but based on the information, based on my research, based on the advice of Benjamin Cohen, it seems to be, well, I don't know if he's actually clarified his view on exactly when this market cycle will end, but basically my approach, so getting kind of to my approach, my strategy now, basically what I'm trying to do is I put in €1,000 roughly, or well, it's about 940 euros, so thereabouts. And so I'm basically just keeping that now. I'm not going to invest any more for this market cycle. I'm going to keep that as it is, and I'm going to try let it accumulate. It will have its ups and downs, but my plan is later in the year, as the market goes up, I'm going to cash out most of it, not all of it. I'm going to cash out most of my Ethereum, cash out most of my Bitcoin, cash out most of my other altcoins as well. And I'm going to keep some money in Cardano and Chainlink as well, and keep a little bit in Ethereum and Bitcoin, but I'm going to cash out most of it. I'm going to try and cash out with a small profit. So I might cash out about, maybe, it depends on how much it goes up, but let's say around the summer, late summer, I might cash out around 1,200, 1,300. And then keep about 300 or so in my portfolio. Quite a conservative approach in many ways, because it's kind of like, well, you're really going to cash out that soon. What if it goes up to, if my portfolio reaches like 2.5 grand at the end of the year, or even 4 grand in 2022. So maybe I will let it go a bit longer. Maybe I'll let it go till Q4 of this year, Q3, Q4 of this year, possibly. But I don't want to, I prefer not to hold on to it for too long, because there will be a crash at some point, and once that crash starts, of course, you don't want to be getting out at the wrong time. So, I might let it go, see if I can get it closer to 2 grand. So that would be 100% increase from when I invested in mid-March, which is possible. Is it possible this year that I could see my portfolio balance double within 9 months for initial investing? It's possible. I think it's definitely possible, and it could happen even sooner. But I'm kind of trying to weigh it up at the moment. But either way, my plan is at some point, I'd say I'm giving it about 90% chance that I'm going to cash out with a small profit in the second half of this year. That is my thinking at the moment. And then my plan then is to reinvest quite a bit. In fact, reinvest maybe several thousand after saving quite a bit of money, just what I'm doing at the moment, to reinvest after the next crash, so during the next bear market. Because what I've come to realize is that an awful lot of people get excited about investing during the bull run because obviously things are going up and up and up. But now I'm realizing, well, actually, I should be in some ways excited for the next crash because, because then you can get to the boring bear market, which could go on for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, who knows? And then I could invest several times what I've invested so far, and then hopefully see the market go up. It could go up by 10, 20, 30, 50 times what it is during the bear market. Of course, the question is, when do you invest during the bear market? Because you don't really know when the next bull will come. So you've got to be so I might kind of gradually invest. So I might put, 500 in 2 or 3 months into the bear market after following a crash. Then put another 500 in, then put 1,000 in. I could do it that way. So I'm sort of thinking my strategy as I go along. And then it would just be a matter of, okay, let's say I put 3,000 or 4,000 in during the bear market. Again, I'm waiting until I've saved quite a bit in my bank account before, because I don't want to have, I don't want to be at a point where I'm putting in like a significant portion of my money there. It still would be a significant portion, but like what I'm saying is I don't want to have like half of my money in crypto. I don't know where I'd limit it. I'd probably limit it, maybe, depends. It depends on how much I've saved. Maybe 25% or something like that. 20%, 30%, maybe. So again, it could be $2,000, could be $3,000. It depends on how much I've saved by then. It depends on what expenses I have at that point. It depends on a lot of different factors, so I have to kind of think it through carefully. But I'm going to create limits for myself and be cautious about it. But my thinking would be that would be quite smart. Even if you put in, say, 2,000 into crypto during the next bear market, it could go up the value of cryptos, assuming that you're not investing like lots of it into random altcoins that are probably going to do terrible, most of them. But if I had most of my portfolio in the likes of Ethereum and Bitcoin, you could see a very significant rise. So let's say I put in 1,500 between Ethereum and Bitcoin during the bear market. Let's say that happened, all right? So let's say the price of Ethereum was, a couple of €100, 300, let's say. There's a very reasonable chance that that the value would 10x, and then you'd have 15,000 a few years later in that scenario. So again, if you're interested in investing in cryptocurrency, do be very cautious about it. Only invest as much as you can afford to lose, and take people's advice with many grains of salt, because anything could happen. But I do believe it's a worthy investment, so that's why I'm doing it myself. So that's pretty much my plan. I'm being cautious about it. I'm mostly thinking the long run. I'm planning to try and take a small profit, maybe a small profit of a few €100 from this bull run, which is, measly by many people's standards. If you look at like what people are talking about, making like thousands, tens of thousands, and so on. But I joined pretty late, and I'm only really starting to save money nowadays, some more income and stuff. So I'm kind of early into my savings at the moment. So I'm kind of taking a cautious approach to this market cycle. I'm just thinking, well, I'll wait till the next bear market to look more at that, because at that point people will be bored, and people won't be interested because they're like, oh, Bitcoin's not doing anything now, and it's the perfect time to invest before the bull run returns, perhaps later this decade. Okay, so let's have a look then at universal basic income and automation. So when it comes to universal basic income and automation, so there's a debate kind of going on at the moment as to whether automation is, on the one hand, there's a concern that it will basically take over such a sizable percentage of jobs faster than we can create new jobs, to the point where it will create significant and permanent permanent increase of unemployment. So rather than it being a case of like a recession where you see the percentage of unemployment increase and then it comes back down, basically the concern is that it would be a steady increase, and that obviously you could see that increased unemployment shoot up during a recession but then shoot back down, but still be a steady long-term increase over years and years and decades. And that basically then, as time goes on, that would happen more as automation begins to take over more sectors, and eventually just reach a point where basically machines can do literally anything. And I mean, I do believe that by the end of the century we will have a situation where work as we know it will basically be non-existent. You might have a handful, you might have like a few percent of people who are actually employed in any sort of meaningful sense, because of some, because there's still a market for it. For example, performances by human beings will still have some degree of value. I mean, like, you can think of sports players, for example. I don't imagine that, robots playing sports it will become a popular thing, but you still will have a market, even if it's less than the market for robots engaging in sport or digital people engaging in sport in like virtual worlds or whatever. You still will have a market for real people playing sports, for example. But I'd imagine that the percentage of people who are actually employed in any sort of real meaningful conventional sense will be a few percent of the population. You'll have still people doing content online, for example, and they'll get ad revenue, presumably. So again, they'll be competing heavily with AI generated content, such to the point that it will, there will still be a market for real people, primarily because of some portion of the population that will choose to consume entertainment of sorts and content and things like that, which actually has real people. But of course, that presumably will be a small percentage, or a shrinking percentage at least. So in that case, then you can imagine that, by 2100, the percentage of the world that will actually be employed will be like maybe 5%. So universal basic income, I think, is inevitable in some form or another. The counter argument is that, they've made this scare story before and it hasn't happened. But I think there is a lot of evidence to say that this is different. It mightn't happen as quickly as some people think. I mean, we may still find that in 2030, this trend has not taken off to such a degree. I mean, it has already started, the automation, mechanization of work and automation taking over manufacturing work and so on. But it hasn't had the sort of permanent long-term, effects that people have been concerned about. But I think that could start to take off maybe in the 2030s. I mean, it could start this decade, right? It could really start to take off this decade. But more than likely, I think the 2030s will be the time where it would actually really start to say, oh, okay, we've got a problem now. This is not just, this is not something that we can keep on top of. This is really starting to become a real issue now. Automation with, autonomous taxis, autonomous delivery vehicles and so on, like that will really be the start of it in many ways, where it would be like, okay, now we can't actually keep on top of this. Now there is not enough new jobs to keep up with the loss of jobs from automation. And that's the point where you begin to really seriously see UBI, I think, coming to the fore. And I think, there'll be a lot of debate, there'll be a lot of sort of pros and cons and this and that, but I think it will eventually happen. And I think that by 2040 we will see many, many countries with universal basic income, perhaps a majority of countries. Certainly the majority in the developed world, and of course the number of countries in the developed world will be quite a bit more than it is now. Presumably by 2040 China and maybe even India will be considered developed countries, and many other countries as well, that are either rapidly developing or developing reasonably fast at the moment. And of course, the number of rapidly developing countries will be significantly higher than it is now. Many African countries, especially, I'd imagine, will move from developing status to rapidly developing status. And that's something that's that's an optimistic sort of well, it's not even optimistic, it's realistic, but it's a hopeful note to touch on, because we have a lot of doom and gloom concerns with climate change, which is very real. But at least we do have counter trends, and technology is really the driving force behind that ultimately. I mean, I guess you could say science is really the true driving force. I mean, I see basically all of the benefits of the way that society has changed in the last several hundred years in terms of standard of living, technology, beginning with the scientific revolution, the scientific revolution, which led to the Enlightenment, which, along with the scientific revolution, led to the development of new technologies and the Industrial Revolution. So it's not all there is to it, but I think it was a key element of it. So yeah, so basically, where will we head then with UBI and automation? Well, I'd imagine that during the 2030s we'll begin to see the percentage of unemployment. Of course, it will vary up and down for all sorts of other reasons to do with potential recessions and market crashes and so on. But I think what we could see is by 2040, the world will recognize that it's got a real problem on its hands, and that the problem is growing because AI will begin to take over, office work. It might begin to get more into areas of law, even into healthcare. I mean, it will really start to push. I mean, it mightn't be dominant in those areas by 2040, but it will, it could. I mean, the singularity, or there's an intelligence explosion. I mean, we don't really know when that's going to happen, but more than likely by 2040, we'll still see most jobs, especially jobs that involve, that's not sort of repetitive tasks or things that aren't as straightforward for AI and automation to take over, will still be dominated by human beings. But during the 2040s and during the 2050s especially, I mean, those 2 decades I think could be the key decades where we really see this trend completely change the world completely. Not like it will begin to during the 2030s, and perhaps even to a certain extent during this decade. Again, I'm going beyond the sort of, well, automation has already taken over manufacturing, so it's already begun. I'm talking about the true automation, the true AI revolution, where it takes over significantly more jobs than new jobs can be created. I think that will begin to really take off in the 2030s. But during the 2040s and 2050s, I think we'll see the entire global economic system completely shift from one system to another, from one sort of framework to another. Even, you might say the actual nature of the system will vary from country to country, but systems within countries, of course, would change a lot. And what would it change to? That's sort of what I'm getting on to now. So the social, political, or economic implications of it. So during the 2040s and 2050s, I think that we'll see the number of jobs, the number of people that are unemployed because they cannot get a job in the economy on a permanent basis will go from maybe 10%, maybe even a little bit higher. Maybe it could be at like 15 or 20%. I'm going to go with 10% as an estimate. 10-15%, I'm going to say. By 2040, I think it will go from that to around about 90% by 2060. So I think 2050s, 2040s, 2050s, those are the 2 decades where I think this will really completely reshape the world. So, what would that mean? Well, I mean, like that's turning the world upside down. It's overthrowing something that has been the norm for thousands of years in most civilizations. The idea that people work, and overthrowing that is, I mean, the implications are, it's a frightening prospect in many ways. But universal basic income there'd be no choice. I mean, it would be virtually impossible. I mean, it would be possible, I suppose, but it would be, it could not be sustained. No government could. I mean, if you're in a non-democratic country, then you would be very concerned that you could have a 90% underclass of people who have nothing, and then the sort of 10% of other people are basically just ruling everything. And I mean, that could lead to genuine dystopias and people like fleeing the countries that, 90% of people are not given anything to do and no money or anything, and they're just like left to starve. I mean, that, is that possible? I mean, in some countries, yes, it could happen, but in the vast majority, political parties will have to adjust and adapt, and, the incentive will be overwhelming to introduce a UBI, because if they don't, well then, we've got a revolution on their hands then, presumably, because, what 90% of population in the democratic country is going to just sit there and be like, oh yeah, well, we have nothing to do, we have no source of income, and that's just how it is, even though you're 90%. But no, the political parties will, they'll be corrupt along the way to some degree or another, but, there will be no stopping, I think, the rise of UBI in the vast majority of countries by around mid-century. That would be my prediction on that. And, so the universal basic income increase would come back. But the thing is, governments would probably introduce a relatively small UBI at the beginning. But what could happen is, relatively fast, the number of people who are permanently unemployed because of automation will begin to increase. And not only will that happen, but inflation will continue. And so you can imagine how this would really escalate wealth inequality. Now, not only would it escalate wealth inequality around the 2040, 2050 sort of time period, presuming that it will continue as well in the next 2 decades before then, I think it will. You would have a situation where the government would set probably a relatively small UBI, and the demand for, kind of like how, there's a demand for increasing the minimum wage, like they want $15 an hour, for example, in the US at the moment. That's the push that's being talked about. There'll be pushes for increasing the UBI, and of course governments will resist, and there might be some pushes, and then the new government will come in and they'll put it up a little bit and so on. But you can imagine how over time, just as wages have stagnated, that the UBI might stagnate too. And the problem is what you have is, and then more and more people will be dependent on that UBI. And before you know it, it's like 2050 and half the population are dependent on a UBI as their primary source of income. And that could really escalate wealth inequality. But then eventually it will increase. And so the question is, will it just stagnate as such, or will there be some sort of massive push towards a new system? Because there's two scenarios you can go here, and this is where you could see something almost more kind of revolutionary happening in some countries, where you have a system in, say, 2060, 2070, where on the one hand you have a conventional capitalist system, which I think actually, I do believe that a free market has massive value in the world right now. And I mean, it's, as long as it's properly regulated, I mean, I think, the free market has proven itself in many ways. It's just, but it does have many flaws, although, certainly communism is not the way to go either. That's worse, much worse. The question is, where do you regulate it? Because here's the interesting thing. I mean, how do you define, like, say, social democracy versus capitalism? Because, according to some people say, well, any regulation makes it not a free market. But it's like, well, then you're kind of saying, well, there is no such thing as a free market in that case, because it's like, well, how can you say that that even exists then? Because it doesn't. Because even in the US, for example, they have many sorts of regulations, maybe not as much as they should, but we have the sort of a capitalist system, which is basically, how would you describe it? So the machine, basically AI, would basically do most of the work for companies and corporations. They would be paying most of the taxes, but it would be very abundant. I mean, you would have incredible levels of production, and things would become very, very cheap. And this is what Elon Musk has discussed quite a bit. And that's true. I mean, you can imagine 2050, like, the productivity of these companies and the services and the competition would mean that you would have very cheap stuff, and you'd have really, not only really cheap stuff, but you'd have an abundance that would make the world of abundance now seem not like it's very abundant, seem like it's lacking in abundance. So that's something that people don't think about when they think about, like, we're concerned about the future and climate change, which I am very concerned about. But we forget that technology will make it so that we will be in a stronger position to deal with it than we would now. That doesn't mean we'll still be strong enough to actually deal with it at all. It doesn't mean that, but it means that at least we'll be in a stronger position the odds would be that bit higher that we could manage it in some, in a way that doesn't involve the collapse of civilization, I suppose. But yeah, so UBI would be a staple of the world around 2050, you'd have to imagine, because by 2050 it would be like, you'd have that system set up. And the issue though is that you would have, governments will be dependent mostly on corporations and companies by around 2050 for taxation, because most people would be paying a relatively low amount of tax. The problem is that could give quite a bit of influence to these companies and corporations, because they already do have that, especially say in the United States, you've got money in politics. But governments have a sense that, oh, we're dependent on these companies for our budget. If you're like, not just a little bit, but the vast majority of the government's budget will be dependent on these companies and corporations. So those companies and corporations would suddenly have a good deck of cards, a good hand of cards. Good hand of cards. That doesn't sound right. They'll have good cards in their hands. They'll have good cards in their hands, and the issue there is that that could give them more and more influence as time goes on. So even though that might still be a situation where most people are doing all right, and where you don't have significant poverty because of the level of abundance, you still could see a sort of inequality that makes today's wealth inequality seem like nothing. And of course, the reasoning will be, or the reason why people might accept it more, is because they'll still have more than enough. So that could happen. The alternative would be, of course, you have AI on automation basically running everything in the public sector. And of course, having everything be in the public sector now, which is literally communism, is not a good idea. Would it be considered communism in this case? I guess you would call it that, but it would be sort of like, it would be AI and automation. So I don't know. That would be an alternative. I'm not saying I'm in favor of it or anything. I'm just saying that could be an alternative that some countries will push toward, and you could see again a revolutionary switch towards that. If not, you've got that other AI automation system, but massive amounts of corruption would presumably be involved. Most people would have more than enough in that situation, but wealth inequality would still be very significant. There'd be very few ways for most people to make much progress. That's the problem. You'd have most people would be quite stagnant in their income. It would just be like, there wouldn't be a sense of, oh, I can start a new career here, or I can do this, or I can do that. It would kind of just be like, the wealthy would have their, supercomputers, and the supercomputers with AI basically finding ways to, invest their money as good as possible. That, makes investing now seem like child's play, and they'll basically, or well, no, the other way around even, should I say, and they'll basically just be able to make the rich even richer and richer, and of course the rich wealthy will as well have presumably abilities to enhance their own intelligence, so not just have super AI on their at their disposal, but yeah, but also that they could themselves, that they could also have AI, or they could also have enhanced intelligence themselves. So the intelligence, or the gap you might call it, that will arise, you'd have growing intelligence inequality, which is like, holy, that's crazy to think about. You already have obviously intelligence inequality by nature, by default, but it's not, you don't have growing intelligence inequality like we have growing income inequality. And that's a scenario that would surely make the growth of income inequality, or wealth inequality even in general, grow like what, exponentially? It's, that's an insane prospect. So that's the thing about the future, is you might have where the majority of people have enough, and that poverty is basically non-existent, but where 99% or 95% of people basically aren't able to go really anywhere with their, it's like, okay, I've got what I need, but there's nothing else to do. There's nowhere to go in the world. There's no way of making progress, and the wealthy are just getting wealthier and wealthier and wealthier, and just shooting off into the stars. That is quite a dystopian scenario. That could really happen, and so that's I'm not really sure what else. There's not really an optimistic tone to end on in that regard. That's kind of what we're looking at one way or another. But then again, who knows? Who knows? You might have sufficient pushback to prevent that happening, government regulation and so on. Who knows? But my prediction is that less than 10% of people will be working by 2060. So there's my prediction anyway in that regard. But yeah, the social implications, I mean, with people not having work, not having a job, not having a career, I mean, it could definitely affect people psychologically. But, you know, I mean, like, what would we do in a world where there's no work and you got universal-based income? I mean, I would, just go around making films, I'd imagine. But, not everyone has the same, maybe, passion around hobbies. And even if you do, is that enough? Is that enough to have a sense of a meaningful life? Well, it depends on the person, really, doesn't it? So it's a tough one, but the future is going to be interesting for sure. All right, so discuss briefly now of FHX, space politics, hypothetical scenarios. So I'll probably be putting up FHX in the next episode in the next day or two, probably 2 days, probably Sunday. Space politics is back today. I'm going to do that tonight. Then you got hypothetical scenarios coming in the over the summer, and then creative plans. Well, there's not really much to discuss there. I'll probably touched on that a bit more in another podcast. I was going to say basically, about how I'm working on short film ideas, short stories, and so on. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I really want to discuss for today. So let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. Do you have cryptocurrency investments? And if so, do you have any tips, any altcoins in particular that have stood out to you, for example? And what do you think about UBI and automation? Are we going to see the scenario of, AI doing most work by 2060 or so, or even a bit sooner? If not, why not? And what do you think about UBI? Do you think it's inevitable? And what do you think about my sort of doomsday, or maybe not doomsday scenarios, because it's not really, but sort of dystopian situations such as where wealth inequality just grows perhaps exponentially for at least some time until you hit some sort of like ceiling of like maximum inequality that's even realistically possible, perhaps. I don't know. It's quite worrying, the future in some ways, but look, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I guess we'll have to find out. So hopefully we're all still here in 2060. Alright, anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.